You know the Magna culture, right? Nobody works for me. You people work with me. I'm working for you. The history of mankind has always been dominated by the golden rule. Here's the gold makes the rule. But I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either.
Hello there, Richard Dolan with another great conversation with our very own Frank Stronach. Today we're going to get deep into his mind around his thinking, his methodology, his psychology to what it means to be an entrepreneur. After all, he's one of Canada's dearest, most celebrated entrepreneurs of all time, having founded Magna International. Frank, good to see you again, my friend.
Well, it's great to see you too as well, and I hope we have an interesting conversation.
Well, you've set the standard high already, and there's no disappointing from this point on. Frank, what's amazing is before we went live with the digital capturing of this conversation, I want to remind viewers to put things into context, what's really inspiring the erection, the launch of the Stronach Academy for entrepreneurship. And what delights me about it is that it's not just based in your thinking of what comes next. It's not based in your thinking of your life and your legacy. It's actually based on the way in which you ran business. In fact, I go back to my historical notes here that in 1995, you launched the Fair Enterprise System. It was a radical, disruptive, innovative, and I would dare say a new wave of thinking on how to approach the economy, entrepreneurship, and responsible business leadership. What inspired you to launch the Fair Enterprise System?
Well, life is an evolutionary process, right? And society came a long way when we look back. We had the caveman, and then we had the hunter and the hunted. And further on, then we had the kings and the servants. And now we have an environment, what I would call the bosses and disgruntled employees. So, in essence, I've witnessed, experienced the lowest of the lows and the highest of the highs. And I've always said, if you've never been hungry, and I mean hungry not because you want to lose weight, hungry because you got no money to buy food, huh? When you experience that, right, then there's something stuck in your mind, right, which when I see poverty, it just how come we have poverty, right? I mean, haven't we made any headways in civilization? And I was on the boards on quite a number of universities. And I gave lectures right from Harvard, right across the States, right across Canada, right across Europe. And in hindsight, I was very critical about myself because I've done things what usually directors do if they be part of a board. But I thought I was a smart guy, and so I looked in the mirror and I said, Frank, you've been missing a number of things. And what I've been missing, I came to the conclusion, what is the mandate of a university? The mandate of a university would be to teach young people how can we have a more civilized society.
And what's amazing about your view on what a civilized society looks like, for a lot of people might be seen as disruptive, even radical. But when I look at the definition for what drove you to rethink enterprise, some people have come to call it both profitable and purposeful. In fact, when we look back at the way in which you launched the Fair Enterprise System, people actually said it was a new wave of both economy and entrepreneurial thinking. You know, just before we started to record this, Frank, you referenced the term religion. And by definition, among many things, by the way, religion means many things to many people, faith, of course, being one of them, but it's also a specific view that is shaped by a specific value. What is it that you value most about entrepreneurship?
Well, entrepreneurship is, I guess the primary reason why people get up in the morning is they want to make a better life for themselves and their family. Okay, so that means you got to think about things. You got to be aware about your surroundings. So some people are more aware than others, and entrepreneurs, I think, are more aware than most people, right? Because they say, "Gee, if I do XXX, I could achieve XXX," right? So entrepreneurship is, I think we have to promote it, right? It's not taught in the schools, right? It's not taught in universities. Entrepreneurship is sort of an accumulation of practical experiences. And as an entrepreneur, you should have perhaps, a cup of wisdom and a cup of common sense, right? You got to mix that a bit, and I think if you use those two liquids, right, I guess you could go up the right direction, right? That's the whole point. The key is when you start out, when you want to do a business, is you should make small steps. You know.
Well, I love that you said that because I have a personal relationship to you, given that back when I was 16 years of age, I was the mentee and you were the mentor. And what was amazing being in school, you came into my business program, and you were the rock star of the day. I mean, a highly celebrated, well-known billionaire businessman came into our classroom and lectured to us. So I love that what you're speaking about isn't just something that you're preaching on. It's something you've always practiced since you've been in business from the very beginning. But I have to say, Frank, and tell me if you would agree with my statement. It's been said in life, someone who's in business should be both the mentee, someone who's been mentored, but also the mentor in their lifetime. And so at 14, when you were the mentee in a tool and die section of a factory back in your homeland of Austria, you were the mentee at that time. You've performed as being the mentor, but it's not now. You've been a mentor to thousands of people who've turned into millionaires over time, turning people who were on your factory floor into foremen, into co-owners, owning up to 10 plus factories. Have you ever seen yourself as a mentor to many?
Well, I consider myself as blessed, you know, and I've always said it doesn't matter how smart you are. If the stars are not aligned, it won't work. Huh? So I've been blessed with a good mind and good health, and I've always said too, when you are younger, we all hustle a bit to make some monies that we can live in dignity. And then as we go older, in my case, as when I get older, I ask myself, what is really the purpose of life? Okay? And to me, I came to the conclusion the purpose of life is what contributions could you make to a more civilized society? Because when we take a look, we are so uncivilized, just when we take a look how we keep farm animals, right? For instance, pigs, right, in cages, they can't move, no daylight, I mean, it's beyond our chickens or our cattle, right, feedlots, hardly can move. I mean, it's awful, right? And the interesting thing is, about 12 years ago, when I reached about 80, I said, "Gee, I've done an estate planning for my, I accumulated a lot of assets, and I said, look, I had a wife and two kids, and so I allocated 1/3 to my wife, 1/3 to my daughter, 1/3 to my son, and then I said, gee, I want to do things now where I could perhaps come forward in a more specific way that we can create a better structure, right? A structure which would lead to an ideal society, right? Because the amazing thing is, which I came to the conclusion too, universities have great faculties when it comes down to medicine, great faculties in technology and the art, but when we take a look in regards to humanity, there is not really, not that doesn't happen much. So, but universities would be the right institutions to teach young people or to experiment. What structures should we have which would lead to an ideal society? That's like a blueprint. It's amazing we got no blueprint.
Well, and by the way, for those who are wondering, well, where did your blueprint come? I'd love to remind them that, well, after employing 180,000 employees and generating upwards of $40 billion in annual sales, the blueprint is in the pudding. You've done it. You've done the work. You've done the reps. You've put in the time. You, by experience, understand what a blueprint should look like for an idealistic society. And this is probably why you gave rise to the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship. But some would ask, Frank, why now? Why at this stage in your life where you could be retired and playing golf, raising your horses, or just working on your tan? Well, why launch this particular initiative, the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship, now?
Well, it's one hopes, right, to grow wiser, right? When we look back in history, pretty well all society had wise councils, and so society made quite a lot of advances in civilization and how we do things. And it seems the last 50 years or more, we sort of we replaced the wise council with politicians. Like so, usually democracies were built upon. You had day-to-day politicians, and then you had senators, right? The senators were supposed to replace the wise council, right? And so, but that didn't work, right? I mean, interesting enough, and George Washington, when he was the first president of the United States, when he stepped back, he said, "Beware of politicians," right? Because at that time there were no parties. So the politicians, and again, we learn from history, right? From time to time, we have to look back and say, who done a great job, in the humanities or mankind, when they take a look from Nelson Mandela to Mahatma Gandhi to King, those were great people. But when we talk about a politician, then we got Churchill stands out, right? He was more of a statesman than a politician. And the interesting part was, in his later years, he said, Parliament doesn't work because we only have politicians in there. And the mandate of a politician is to be elected or re-elected. He said that doesn't work. We need a chamber of citizens to balance out politicians.
Well, I don't want to go off topic, but this likely gives rise to the linkage between the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship and your Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. They go hand in hand. This is the other initiative that is a big part of your life and legacy, whereby you're mobilizing a chamber of citizens to do a very socially responsible but economically powerful thing in the world. But it sounds like a great keystone to that is this academy. When I read the description of the academy, Frank, I want to share it with you because it's on your website and it defines what the academy is designed for. You're talking about educating high school students, college kids, university students exploring entrepreneurship as a way of life, aspiring entrepreneurs looking for practical guidance, and existing small business owners that are seeking to grow and improve their business and the ideas for it. Those are very specific groups. Do you feel like you would have identified in one of those buckets when you first came to the country with $22 or $200 in your pocket?
No, to say when I came first, I heard when I was a kid, right, that in Canada, United States, if you get a job, maybe after a few months you could buy a car, right? And my desire was, when do I have my own bike, right? I had to share my bicycle with my sister, right? So my desire was to have maybe a car, and then when I experience sort of some bad situation, when I run out of money and I was hungry, and so then my desire was, gee, I never want to be hungry anymore. That was my number one. And hopefully I can do things that nobody will go hungry, right? And that's the very key. What drives me is, look, we gotta eliminate poverty. Okay, that's the key about the whole thing, and that's why I call it the economic charter of rights, and that's why it's important that we have different learning institutes, right? The more for practical experiences, right? That's why that's why I kind of. I'm looking forward to work together with you, to educate a lot or give assistance to a lot of young entrepreneurs, or want to be entrepreneurs, a young businessman, where we can give them practical experiences by doing XXX.
No, well, it's a pleasure. It's a noble mission, one I accept, and you've got an incredible team here that's a part of the whole mission as well. But I love what we're assembling, Frank, which is a wise counsel. You said this a few moments ago, where gone are the days of having wise counsel. So whether you were a king or a baron or a head of state, you always relied upon wise counsel. But it's amazing that between wise counsel and politicians, what separates them is agenda. And what's nice about the agenda for those behind the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship is that we want people to succeed. We want them to become the best versions of themselves. We want them to find their affinity and their entrepreneurial expression for it. And what I love about that is you've become the best you can be in this lifetime because you found your affinity early. So a big part of the ethos for SAFE, which is an acronym to describe the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship, is first finding out what you really want to be known for, the affinity part. Tell me how important it was for you to find your affinity early, Frank.
I think the key is, when you be in your early 20s, you don't know yourself. And when I gave lectures, I gave a lot of lectures in universities, and I always told the students the success of life can only be measured the degree of happiness you reach. But at the same time, I told them, let me tell you from my experience, it's a lot easier to be happy if you got some monies. And the young kids would have asked, the smart kids would have asked, how can we make some money? So I usually tell them, look, in your early 20s, you don't know yourself. Experiment a bit. In the final analysis, you should do something where you have an affinity, where you have a liking to it. And then I think if you have a liking, affinity to something, then you're going to be good in it because you enjoy what you do. And if you put in the extra effort, you could be one of the best. And if you be one of the best, money is a byproduct. If you be one of the best, then you make more money, right? You got to see to be one of the best. So, but going back to the wise counsels and the difference between a politician and a wise counsel, the wise counselors, those are the people which done things, experienced thing, either making things, or there's a lot of ways, right? But the politicians have been basically done politics, right? Okay.
Well, here's what I love is that, and this might sound like a commercial for the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship, but I'll say this very poignantly because I actually feel very passionate about it. And that is this: when has anyone ever received an opportunity of being mentored by an accomplished billionaire? Someone who radically reimagined an industry, who reshaped economies, even, dare I say, countries and their policies, all because of the success that you curated, you envisioned, and you realized for decades. What I love is that, and you've said, and I want to quote you, my friend, you said, quote, "A cup of wisdom mixed with a cup of common sense will keep you going in the right direction." This is what it means to have the right mentorship, the right guidance, the right counsel. And I love that what goes hand in hand, Frank, is that the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship works in tandem with your vision for a better society, given what you've authored in the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, which is to empower people to create for themselves their own economic independence, their own economic strength, their own economic sovereignty. Given the political environment we're in, given the way the economy is and geopolitical events that are unfolding, Frank, how important is it for people to create economic sovereignty for themselves today?
Well, what amazes me is that we talk very little about the economy. Okay, the economy is basically the most important subject. Okay, and the one thing, and I constantly hop away on that, the economy, because it amazes me. It's the most important subject, and we don't talk about it. So again, why do I say the economy is the most important thing? All politicians will agree, all business people will agree, pretty well all people agree, if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. If the economy doesn't work, you cannot feed the hungry. If the economy doesn't work, you cannot look after the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. But we do not talk what drives the economy. It's the economy, the economy. The economy is driven by three forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. And I'm saying all three have a right to the outcome, which is profits. Well, the message I want to get across loud and clear: without workers, you can't make a profit. The very important thing is, I've always said, we need a revolution of the mind. No destructive revolutions. I'm not preaching, let's take away from the rich. I am preaching, let the workers participate when you bake the economic pie.
You know, I have to admit something, and I hope I didn't cut you off, Frank, but just for our listeners and our viewers, I have to admit something personally, that we talk about these things dozens of times. I've had the pleasure of working with you for a number of years, and the term revolution comes up often with you. And I have to admit, and I don't mind sharing this, is I had to look up the word. And I was amazed at how powerful of a word it was, and now I understand why you use it. Among many ways of defining revolution, it's also known and defined as a radical departure from the norm. A radical departure from the norm. And I've never thought of you as a radical person, but I do know you as a radical thinker. Would you agree?
No, I want to stress.
Please.
I want to really, no chainsaw approach, no radical. I'm saying in a civilized country, every citizen's got the right to find a job, whatever the openings are. Okay? So it's the system which doesn't function. So I'm not blaming the bureaucrats, right? But we are way, way, way over-regulated, right? And I'm saying it's not radical. I would not recommend to fire the bureaucrats.
Of course.
I'm saying let's put a hiring freeze, okay? So the thing is, we want to have a very civilized revolution. The main thing is no destructive revolutions of the mind. And the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights would lead to a peaceful revolution, to a constructive revolution where we could eliminate the poverty.
No, I love it. And by the way, just to make sure that we're clear, and our listeners are too, when I say a radical departure, I don't mean a radical revolution. That's why you always will say it's a revolution of the mind, which is a very quiet, stealth, elegant way of really reimagining things, whether it's policy or politics or people, education, entrepreneurship, or even society. And I love that. This is not something by force. This is something through thinking, through applying your own ideas and your values and your views in a very nonviolent, non-disruptive way. So I want to make sure that's clear. And this is inspiring to me. Going back to when I asked about your thoughts on mentorship and my experience of you as one, Frank, here's what's interesting. You're starting to invite young people to have dinners and lunches with you, before we even begin talking about how amazing that is and how people can take advantage of it. So stay tuned, folks, as we'll talk with Frank about how you can actually join Frank over a meal and being able to ask him questions that might be on your mind. Frank, why is it important for you to immerse yourself into the student body of Canada?
Well, again, I consider myself blessed. And sometimes I say a silent prayer how great life has been to me, how Lady Fortuna, kind of maybe guided me from time to time. And so I think I have really no agenda, that I, I have circumstances that let me accumulate a lot of wisdom, okay? And I think it's very important that wisdom or those experiences, they should be made available to the young people of Canada, right?
Do you feel that it's your responsibility to share that wisdom that you've gathered over the years, Frank, or do you feel compelled to share that wisdom?
Well, I think it's in between, huh? I think it's my conscience. You know, I think from time to time, I think it's important that we have a conscience. Every day, look, we are influenced by good spirits and bad spirits, always been, right? Is it right what we do? Is it good or bad? Is it constructive or destructive, right? We constantly, and I think your conscience, you got to be guided by your conscience, right? Okay, so I'm guided by that, and I do hope that I'd like to see Canada being the first country in the world which will fortify its human charter of rights with an economic charter of rights, right? And the economic charter of rights would be put in the Constitution to fortify the human charter of rights.
I like that. And before we touch about that, I have to say I wrote this note down around good and bad spirits, and maybe for self-serving reasons, maybe even selfish reasons. I have to admit something to you. When I first became an entrepreneur, after being inspired by the fact that you were a rock star of entrepreneurs, I remember being very focused on just money. It was all about money. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I will tell you and admit that over the years, it became less and less about money and it became more about impact. Do you feel that different age and different stage as an entrepreneur shapes or shifts what it is that you value? Were you driven by money early on more than later on?
Yes, early on, if I said I was hungry, so for me, my foremost thing was, what do I have to do? Never be hungry anymore. Never to crawl for somebody, right? Be a man walking up straight, right? Okay, so that is, and it's like, it's easier to be noble, right? When things are well settled, when you have some monies in the bank, right?
Right. But to interrupt, that's what some people will say. I've heard very wealthy people say it's not about the money, but it's easy for them to say because they've got so much. But what you're saying is that as you've gotten on in your years, you've really reflected and believed that your original motivation can't be the only motivation because you weren't hungry in your 40s and 50s or 60s. You were driven by something else. Would you agree?
Well, I was driven that I thought that I was blessed that I could leave, call it a major impact on society, right? There's a saying, you are what you eat, right? And in life you are what you experience, right? And that will shape you and form you, right? And I've been, I've seen so many things, right? And experienced so many things, and so I think you reach a point where when you can give, you feel so much better than if you if you get things, right, or
I
accumulate things, right?
I agree.
So, but I think, but on the other hand, I always tell young people, you must focus on today to stay alive, but leave the door open for tomorrow and follow your dreams and be guided by your conscience. That should be embedded in the young people, right? Because I think for entrepreneurs, you gotta have a dream. You gotta visualize, but then you gotta be realistic, right? You gotta find out what you like. You know what affinity do you have, right? And to create wealth and for people to have high living standards, we gotta make things or produce things, right? For instance, one of the great problems we be facing, what's very important, food will be the next wave, huh? Food, there'll be a shortage of food, right? Not because of the Ukraine war, well, that doesn't help either, but the population growth, right? More highways, more subdivision. We more chemicals. We destroy the soil. So there's so many things here. You know, yes, my fourth book is, I think, going to be in print. I think maybe in a couple of weeks, and I'm thinking actually of writing a fifth book, right? Because the fifth book is. What are the minimum standards of a civilized society? What are the great dangers? Is the population growth? Huh? You mean the planet Earth cannot feed that many things without chemicals, etc. So there's a very thing how we gonna tackle that. How can we find civilized solutions, right? Of course, education will play a great role because in the final analysis, we all want the same thing, right? I mean, you got a girl and a guy, they want to get married, they want to have kids, they want to have the best thing for the kids, right? Okay, and so that's the circle of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of circle of life, I mean, this conversation can get quite circular. I mean, you're a cornucopia of inspiring thoughts and gifts and insights. First of all, just to reverse engineer what you just said and unpack it a little bit, congratulations on the fourth book that's about to hit the press. I know that's much about your fine work with the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities. The fifth book, which you've just now told me for the first time, I love the idea of what the minimum standards of an idealistic society will look like. But just moving back a little bit more so that we don't lose our listeners and our viewers, you know, you said something that was very powerful around affinity. And as we begin to wind down the conversation, here's how I unpack it. As you talked a bit about dreams, you say to young entrepreneurs, don't lose sight of your dreams. What I love about the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship, in the first step of the 4 steps that a participant endures, is we find their affinity by first understanding what problem should they get really motivated by. For you, it was being hungry. So what I find as an entrepreneur is that I never wanted to be poor because I didn't want to be associated with being poor. So the counteraction to that was, well, make more money. But once you solve that problem, what I love what you're saying, Frank, is really lock into your passion. I think I have an inkling. I have an idea what your passion was when you started Magna. But I want to ask you a very tough question. Here it comes. I don't want to know what your passion was when you started Magna. What was the passion in you that kept growing Magna? What turned your flame brighter and stronger? What would you think it was?
Well, I think the key is if you want to bring about change, you want to create a role model. How do you do it? You know, there is an incredible energy and there's so much ability in people, right? You got to bring it out via the right environment. Yeah, every person's got so much ability, right? And you got to bring it out for the benefit of mankind. Huh? The real key is how can we eliminate poverty? and how can you have a more civilized society, the way we treat animals.
Now, before we go to animals, I just wanted to put a pin in something. When you hired folks, and I mean, you employed over 180,000 people at one point, did you find yourself on a mission to help them escape poverty, to be economically independent in your view, given how you valued the importance of never going hungry? Did you want that for everybody that worked for Magna?
Well, yes, I was heavily involved when it comes down to managers, right? And so I was looking for kind of a people which have an entrepreneurial instinct, okay? And so it was a wide variety, right? From when I gave lectures in university or high schools, that a few years later I met some people, or some really stood out and said, gee, they have a bit of an entrepreneurial instinct. Those are the people I wanted to, huh? And usually, when I had a prospective manager or somebody which I had a bit of an entrepreneurial instinct, I said, look, there's a list of 50 companies. Talk to the managers how I run things, and then let me know if you want to join us. And in all cases, they wanted to join. So I said, look, talk with the people, talk with the thing which run things, and if you want to be part of it, if you want to do the same thing.
I like that. What you saw in people was their potential. What you saw in them was possibility, which really is, quite frankly, aligned with the spirit of what gave rise to this Stronach Academy. Now, let's go back to the students and your small business program, because with the time that we have left, I teased our viewers that we were going to talk a bit about. You've got a very, very interesting opportunity. Apparently, you have a program that's being launched for both students and small business owners, where for a small fee, they receive a basket of opportunities, ranging from copies of your book, Magna Man, to the Road to Economic Freedom, right through to the opportunity of asking you a series of questions. But what's more interesting is that there's a way to join you for lunch or dinner?
Well, it's, I think, when I was a young guy, right, and, at one time I had a chance to have lunch with Lee Iacocca, right? He was, okay.
That's right.
So I think a lot of young people want to have lunch or dinner with some people which have been very successful, right? Okay. And so I think so yes, we will. I'm looking forward, right? I like to do it maybe and have the first this year, right? In the last week in August, because those might be university students or which usually in September and so on, they wanna get the thing. So that might be maybe a right time where maybe where students would be available, and I like to. They would have to write an essay. If I would be prime minister, what would I do, right? Okay.
What a great question.
They would write an essay, and we would have maybe a group of people which would analyze the essays and call it the 24 successful, because let's say we like to have at least 2 from the lower populated provinces, right, and maybe 3 from the higher populated. So it would rock to about 24 students to have, and with the key staff of the academy, where we would have dinner with them and answer questions. The key is to answer question, how did we do it, right? I think we gotta get across the practical way, and common sense, wisdom and common sense, how do you acquire that, right? You acquire that by experiencing things, right? By doing things.
Right.
Okay.
A lot of people think.
So it might seem, students, when you got to take a look and say, well, to join the thing, it's $200. I think the books would be. I think the books would be a great thing here, and most of all, we would have some website seminars where we talk about the economy, where the people could pipe in and participate, right? So but entrepreneurs or young people might have a specific question, right? Which we would which we would answer.
Well, I'm getting excited. I can't even sit still. I'll tell the viewers, especially those who are young and aspiring entrepreneurs, here's what I like about the opportunity of breaking bread with Frank Stronach, is it's really rare you have the opportunity of sitting in front of live and in person with a living legend like yourself. And I say this every time I see you. You know this to be true, Frank. Every time I see you, I hug you. Every time I part from you, I hug you because I'm grateful for the opportunity of being with you. And I think for a lot of people, we misunderstood the idea notion of education, that somehow it requires you being in a classroom and learning from a textbook or through instruction where there's one instructor and many pupils. Education, as I've learned with you, Frank, is also being inspired, listening to someone's insights, learning from their experience, their history, their trials and tribulations, their triumphs, their letdowns, and their victories. And this kind of education is where mentorship lives. This is where the magic of understanding the history of someone is an education you just can't seem to capture in a classroom. You can't just capture it in one book. It has to be experienced. And what I love is you give people the opportunity of asking you questions, tapping into your mind. What do you look forward to most when you're surrounded by students? Because I remember your dear right hand, Ioana, she set us up to be at the University of Toronto. We were in this auditorium. Do you remember? A massive auditorium. There was standing room only. Children from all around the world who applied to this Rotman Business School, the highest division of academia for business and entrepreneurship exists. And you gave a lecture. And I sat front row and I looked, and when you asked the question, are there any questions? Do you remember? The lineup of kids ran along the whole side of this entire building, and we were there for longer answering questions than we were there to witness your lecture. What lights you up? What runs through your mind when you see a long row of people in a queue dying to ask you a question?
Well, it is. I usually told the young people is that you're very fortunate and you should be grateful that your parents endured maybe some hardship, that they provided you or had a chance to get a good education, right? And you have a right to whatever wisdom, whatever education or know-how you have accumulated, to use it for your own purpose. But don't ever forget, a portion of that knowledge has got to flow back to society. That's the key. We gotta eliminate poverty.
And that's the key. The only way we can eliminate poverty, such a huge epidemic of massive proportions, is, as you said, causing and creating the revolution of the mind. Starting in the education, starting with inspiring thoughts.
The key is some wise words when you make the first steps. That's very, very key, right? And hopefully I know I will be able that we can teach some teachers, right? Where we try to inject them with some wisdom and common sense, right? So I'm looking forward to that, and I'm looking forward, and I know there's such a potential in people, and where we transfer that potential to all the young people and business.
Yeah, it's amazing. I had the profound honor and privilege of having known our dear friend, the legendary broadcaster Larry King. And before he passed away, I had the opportunity of interviewing him one final time before he did. And the world misses him. I know we miss him. But he said something very profound there that I know he wanted me to remind you, Frank, and I want for our viewers and for the sake of this recording to go on forever, is this. He said that today, whatever was old is new again. Whatever was old is new again. So, although some people might say, well, we've got technology to teach people about entrepreneurship, and there's online courses, and there's YouTube, and there's videos, and there's influencers, and there's social media, and there's a plethora of opportunity for people to learn. At the end of the day, that is new, but it's no longer working. What's needed is a revolution of the mind. So, whatever is old is new again. Mentorship, right? Being tutored, hands-on, practical sense, finding yourself, getting passionate again about resolving for yourself problems and challenges so you can fall back in love with your future. Now, I know you agree with this, but let me ask you this final question, is that what excites you most? What excites you, Frank, my dear friend? What excites you most about being the person who's catalyzing this revolution of the mind for entrepreneurs? What do you hope happens? What can't you wait to see occur?
Well, I guess we're talking now of a real great revolution, a revolution which will change the world, right? Okay, if we could eliminate poverty, it changes the world, right? So I hope to with the right economic system, we can create a more civilized society. Okay, and so we should, and hopefully we could avoid war, and just where nations say, look, our society, we have less poverty, right? And we be engaged by that, right? So that is one of the key things we have to get across. Let's compete, because we got the communistic kind of a system out there and the capitalistic system, right? So I think the competition will be what system is a more civilized system. And I like to point out too, in the final analysis, people would like to be economically free, because if you're not economically free, you're not a free person. So I think the key is when we teach, or when we transmit, call it logical, common sense kind of slogans or wording. I think you always gotta put some definition to it, right? When you say economically free, even that means from let's say, just to be practical, a Canadian woman or Canadian man, if they work for 30 years, they should have enough accumulated that they have a house, or a condo where to live in without any mortgages, right? Okay. And they should have enough accumulated, and I would say a minimum of 300,000, so they could supplement their pensions and choose their own road to happiness for their later years. So we gotta have minimum standards, and that should be easily achievable, right? Because we have developed so many technologies where we could really raise the living standards, but we gotta come down to what's holding us back. Why have we gone backwards, right? We must reduce regulations. And the very key is without free enterprise, there isn't a free society. But we are so far away now, we're getting further and further away from free enterprise, We got so many people breathing down your neck. You cannot do this, you cannot do that, and that, right? I mean, you got thousands and thousands of lawyers. You got it's everything is down to micro details. You cannot do that, and I've always said, parents, if they have kids and they love the kids, you can't lock them up in a rubber room. So, and hope they never get injured, right? Okay. So, but with business, that's even less. We gotta get, 50, 60, 70 years ago, free enterprise was that's what made America great. That's what made Canada great. But we're getting so far away from it. And 50, 60, 70 years ago, there was a great concern for the safety, for the environment, and for being civilized. So let's go. We, like you said, sometimes we have to listen to the old wise man, right? They say,
right.
You cannot do that, or such and such a thing is better for society.
Yeah, well, I know I can say this on behalf of all those fans and followers of your work, your life, and your legacy, that we're grateful that a wise council is being erected in your honor, the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship. I'm delighted to be a part of it. That's number one. But here's my take. I've heard loud and clear that the time has come for the revolution of a mind. It sounds like it's educative in nature, but it's economic in focus. It sounds to me that it's not just about any particular class of people, part of society, or a geographical realm of Canada. It's for all Canadians. And as you said here, and I wrote it down because it left me inspired, Frank, where you said being economically free, because when you're not economically free, you're not free at all. And that's really what it's about. It's about really resurrecting, recreating, reimagining an ideal society, one thought at a time. And I love that you're going to do this through your educative initiative, through the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities that you envision. And here's my closing point. What I love is you've created a vision for people to be inspired and motivated by. A vision like having in my lifetime a home that's paid off, cash I can rely upon, and having the economic freedom of rights that I have worked so long and hard for. No one has envisioned a financial free future for people quite clearly as you have. And so thank you for that.
I think there's something to think about it. And people have the ability to create, a civilized society. And I think really, again, but we must dismantle the chains of dominations. The chains of domination is the golden rule, right? And again, I'm trying to preach, it's gotta be with the revolution of the mind, right? So that's holding us back, right? It's holding back education. It's holding back the economy. There are people out there which think like the public is not reliable. It's not, it's not. But I do believe that. But basically, we all want to have reasonable the same, right? Not to be hungry and have shelter, right? Okay,
We love that.
And be happy.
Well, listen, on behalf of all Canadians I know who are going to be moved, touched, and inspired by not only your life, your work, but also this legacy that you're busy building, we thank you, Frank. We thank you. Thank you for the conversation, and thank you for the work.
Okay.
The work continues.
Yeah, so we'll have some more podcasts, right?
We'll do more broadcasts.
I think we owe it to the people to see there's a lot of options out there. We want to educate the people with words of wisdom and some common sense.
With common sense, with Frank Stronach. Thank you again, Frank.
Okay, thank you.
I'm Richard Dolan. Thank you so much for joining us this time in a conversation with our dear friend, your friend, Frank Stronach. If you want to learn more about the Stronach Academy for Entrepreneurship, or learn how to get involved in the Canadian Economic Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, two incredible initiatives being headed up by our very own Frank Stronach, write us, reach out, or look for more information online. Until next time, we'll join Frank Stronach in another great conversation about you and Canada.